The last week has seen tensions between Israeli and Palestinian forces reach a breaking point. After 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped and murdered in the West Bank last month, a Palestinian teen was burned alive in an alleged revenge killing. Since then, Israel has called up 40,000 reserve forces, and today the Israeli military bombed at least 50 sites across Gaza, killing at least 16 people as of this broadcast and injuring more than 100 in what's being called Operation Protective Edge. According to government officials, the strikes are in response to armed factions in Gaza firing rockets into southern Israel, although no deaths have yet been reported as a result of these attacks. So you get a better picture of what's happening on the ground, as well as larger implications of the current violence. I was joined earlier from Jerusalem by Miko Peled, the son of a former IDF general, grandson of one of Israel's founding fathers, and author of the book, The General's Son. I started by asking Miko to give us an update on the last few days.
Ever since this case of these 3 young men that were kidnapped came out, the Israeli army has been marching up and down the West Bank like Roman legions, destroying absolutely everything on their path, destroying homes, arresting people, beating people, killing people. The situation outside of the West Bank and the rest of the country in Palestinian communities is very frightening. Palestinians are afraid to walk in the streets, they're afraid to go to work, they're afraid to go to the stores. And I'm talking about Palestinians inside Israel, Israeli citizens, because there's this insane atmosphere of hatred and that is being fomented from the top, of course. And they're using, as they always do, this as an excuse to attack more. And in terms of their own thinking, they're gaining political points, thinking of what it's going to be, how it's going to show next time they go to the polls.
And I wanted to read 2 tweets from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu from about a week ago, who partially quoted a poem by an Israeli poet in the aftermath of the death of the 3 Israeli teens. Vengeance for the blood of a small child Satan has not yet created. Neither has vengeance for the blood of 3 pure youths who are on their way home to the parents who will not see them anymore. Hamas is responsible. Hamas will pay. Miko, do you think this sort of inflammatory rhetoric on behalf of government officials are fueling the attacks against Palestinians we're seeing now?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, it's cynical of Netanyahu to use that, because he is responsible for the death and of so many children. You know, it's interesting. Everybody's shocked by this particular death of this boy who was kidnapped and burned by, you know, the people who did this. You know, I don't know. What do they think happens when Israel drops bombs from the air on civilians? They burn children and kill them all the time. But it's interesting that suddenly the press and the world has taken an interest in this particular thing, as though it's unique, and Netanyahu thought to apologize for this and so forth. He is responsible. He and his generals are responsible for so many dead children and burnt civilians and so much destruction. You know, it's cynical. It's sad. It's tragic. And I think it's important to realize that Israel is giving the Palestinians only 2 options: to surrender completely or to resist. And obviously, resistance is what they're doing right now.
Miko, it is very tragic. It's horrifying. It is amazing how the Western media is finally paying attention when it's an American teen who was beaten. But even then, you see all the framing is alleged beating, apparent beating. Even though we have video of the beating, I don't know why it's alleged or apparent. Miko, and let's move on to the IDF Facebook page calling for genocide on a lot of comments. I wanted to read a tweeted out screenshot by journalist Rania Kalik, basically invoking genocide of Native Americans as a model. Someone named Stefan Miller says, "No more peace, no more releasing terrorists, no more taking prisoners. Kill them all," liked more than 100 times by other people. Do you think this sort of commentary is an aberration or indicative of a larger sentiment? And how do you think the media would be treating these kinds of threads if they were Palestinians writing about Israelis?
You know, yesterday I went to see the parents and visit the grave of Nadim Nawara, who was killed just before I was on your show last time, on the 15th of May. He was one of the 2 youths who was killed. And then afterwards we went to the family's home, and there were people there talking, and the discussion was very casual, very natural, but all about seeking justice and finding the soldiers and taking him to court, and the fact that this particular case, the murder of that particular child, and does not mean that all Israelis are bad, does not mean that all Jews are bad, does not mean that they hate all Israelis or all Jews. This was the sentiment, and this is the discussion in every bereaved home that I visit of Palestinians. And here in Israel, I think it has to do with the basic ideology that framed Israel, the basic ideology upon which Israel was established, which is a racist, colonialist ideology, which is what Zionism is, and it calls for the replacement of the native population with Jews. And so we have to remember that the State of Israel was established after a horrendous act of terrorism in which more than half of the population of Palestine was forced out, and half of the cities and towns were destroyed. So this was the very beginning of the State of Israel, and what is happening today is just a continuation of that. There's really not much difference. And periodically we see these outbursts of racism and violence peak a little bit more than other times.
Right, it seems like it's framed as this cycle of violence without getting to the root of how why this is happening. Miko, let's move on to your own experiences on the ground. Last Friday, you were protesting in the town of Belin. You were arrested. Why were you there, and what circumstances surrounded your arrest?
Belin has become the mecca of the nonviolent resistance. The popular resistance in Palestine came out of Belin. It's a small town, maybe half an hour drive from Jerusalem. A small village, actually. It's not a town, it's a village. And the people began this nonviolent popular resistance, and they're met with horrendous violence by the Israeli military, arrests, beatings, and so forth. The protests take place every Friday, and whenever I'm here, I join them. They're good friends of mine, and I support them completely. And so we walk all the way up to where they built the wall. Now, on the lands of what used to be the lands of Bil'in, there's now a city that was built for Jews only. It's called Modi'in Elite. And so they walk up to the wall, which was built right there on their land, and protest. And so the Israeli army stands up at the top of the wall and shoots tear gas and shot grenades at the crowd. And then at one point they open this big gate in the wall, and they come in with their armored vehicles and their soldiers dressed with riot gear and full combat gear. I don't know why, because there is no riots going on and there's no combat there. It's just civilians with a few flags and, you know, some students who come and the local Palestinians. And when they began shooting, they've got these little grenade launchers, not little, big grenade launchers on the vehicles, and they start shooting them into the crowd. The crowd begins to run away, of course, and they keep shooting. And I stood there by the officer in charge, and I didn't move away. I stood there, and I talked to him, and I tried to talk to him, and to tell him that this was illegal and that he's shooting into an unarmed crowd. And one day he's going to have to explain this in court. At which time he turned to me, started pushing me, and proceeded to arrest me. And then I spent the next 10 hours with these soldiers and police, and being interrogated and questioned and so forth.
How would you recommend, as someone who was, your family was intimately involved in the foundation of Israel, your father, an IDF general, what do you suggest the Israeli government do when Hamas is saying that they will fire more rockets into Israel that they claim have the potential to reach Tel Aviv?
If they don't like the rockets, they can lift the siege on Gaza and allow the Palestinian refugees to go back to their homes. Furthermore, they can release all the Palestinian prisoners unconditionally and call for free and fair elections, one person, one vote for everyone who lives in this country, and cancel the apartheid regime. In other words, topple the apartheid regime. This is what needs to happen, and it needs to happen immediately, and until it happens, the world needs to boycott this place and impose sanctions on Israel.
Thank you so much, Miko Peled. Appreciate it.